My name is Helen Reed. For the better part of 70 years, I've considered my life a quiet book, its pages filled with the gentle prose of a small town, the steadfast love of a good man, and the unassuming joy of raising a son. I live in Oakhaven, a town nestled in a valley where the seasons don't just change, they announce themselves with polite ceremony. For 3 days a week, I work at the local library, surrounded by the hushed whispers of stories waiting to be discovered. I drive a 12-year-old sedan that knows the way to the grocery store by heart, and my wardrobe is a collection of comfortable, time-tested pieces that would never grace the pages of a fashion magazine. To the world, and especially to my daughter-in-law, I was a simple widow, living a life of careful economy, a relic of a bygone era. This carefully curated quiet was a promise I made to my late husband, Thomas. He was a brilliant, unassuming engineer who, in his youth, had developed a series of patents for water purification that quietly revolutionized the industry. We made a conscious decision to live modestly, to raise our son Leo away from the distorting lens of wealth. Money builds high walls, Helen, Thomas used to say, his hand over mine. I'd rather we build bridges. We believed that true richness was found in privacy, in security, in the freedom from the wanting eyes of the world. I never imagined that the most wanting eyes would one day belong to my own family. The slap was a sound that didn't belong in the elegant hall of the Birchwood Manor. It was a sharp, ugly crack that silenced the string quartet and froze the champagne glasses mid-air. My spectacles spun from my face, landing with a delicate crunch on the polished oak floor, a tiny, irreparable sound in the vast, echoing silence of 150 guests. My cheek bloomed with a hot, stinging pain, but it was a distant sensation compared to the profound, shattering ache in my chest. Isabel, my daughter-in-law, stood before me, her hand still raised, her face a mask of furious righteousness. Her exquisite lace wedding gown, a confection of ivory and pearls, seemed to radiate a cold light. "That is for being so stubbornly selfish," she hissed, her voice slicing through the stillness. "A woman your age has no need for a 3-bedroom apartment in the historic district. It's wasteful." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Guests averted their gazes, suddenly fascinated by their dinner plates or the floral centerpieces. A few whispered behind their hands, but no one moved. No one came to my side as I knelt, my hands trembling, to gather the splintered remains of my glasses. And Leo, my son, my only child, stood beside his new wife, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my head, as if I were a stranger who had stumbled into his perfect day. He was a statue carved from inaction. "We need a place to start our life," Isabel continued, her voice rising with a performative tremor. "A place to build our future. Your apartment would give us that start. But you'd rather cling to your memories than help your own son." Her words were precision-honed scalpels, designed to find and sever the deepest bonds of maternal love. For months, I had weathered the storm of her subtle condescension, the polite digs at my charming, but dated furniture, the concerned suggestions about my lonely lifestyle, the pitying glances at my practical car. But this public spectacle of cruelty was not a storm. It was an earthquake, and the ground beneath my feet had just split wide open. I rose slowly, my vision blurred by tears and the lack of my lenses. I felt the weight of every stare, each one a pinprick against my exposed soul. But beneath the humiliation, a new and unfamiliar feeling began to solidify within me. It was a cold, quiet resolve. That slap was not just an act of violence. It was a moment of absolute, horrifying clarity. The quiet book of my life had been torn from my hands, its spine broken. As I turned and walked toward the grand exit of the manor, the hushed conversations followed me like a cloud of wasps. "Poor thing, she looks so lost," I heard one of Isabel's aunts murmur. "Well, Isabel has a point," a cousin of Leo's added. "It's not safe for her to be rattling around in that big place alone. She should be in a nice retirement community." Each comment was a small twist of the knife, offered under the guise of compassion. My handbag, a sturdy leather companion of 7 years, felt heavy in my trembling hand. I'd kept it not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because it was dependable and held everything I needed. I valued substance over style, a philosophy Isabel would never comprehend. Once outside, the cool evening air was a balm on my burning cheek. I sat on a stone bench overlooking the manor's manicured gardens, the scent of roses and damp earth filling my lungs. I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I needed to let the pieces of my shattered world settle before I could decide how to put them back together. Or if, perhaps, they needed to be reassembled into something entirely new. My mind drifted back 2 years, to the day Leo first brought Isabel to my apartment for dinner. He had that nervous, hopeful smile he'd worn since he was a boy, presenting me with a handful of dandelions. "Mom, this is Isabel," he'd said, his voice brimming with an emotion he so clearly believed was love. She was beautiful, polished, and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her smile, however, never quite reached her eyes. She stepped into my home, her gaze sweeping over the comfortable, worn armchairs, the shelves overflowing with books, the faded Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from Thomas's parents. "How cozy," she'd said, the word hanging in the air like a poorly disguised insult. Leo, besotted and eager to please, seemed deaf to the condescension. But I heard it. I felt it in the way she subtly shifted to avoid brushing against my outdated curtains, in the way she inspected a water ring on a side table with the focus of a forensic scientist. That first dinner was a quiet exercise in observation. She asked about my life, but her questions were less about connection and more about reconnaissance. It must be a challenge, managing on just a pension and your library wages, she'd probed, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "This building is in such a prime location. The property taxes must be astronomical." I gave her simple, honest answers, all the while watching her. I saw the way her eyes lingered on the crown molding, the original hardwood floors, the view of Oakhaven's historic town square from my living room window. She wasn't seeing a home filled with memories, she was seeing an asset. The visits that followed became a subtle, escalating campaign. The suggestions started gently. "Helen, have you ever considered a condo? All the modern amenities, none of the upkeep." Then they grew more insistent. "We worry about you here alone. What if you fell? It could be days before anyone found you." Leo began to echo her words, his own voice sounding hollow and rehearsed. "Mom, Izzy has a point. We just want what's best for you." Seeing my son, the boy I had taught to think for himself, become a mouthpiece for her ambition was a unique and profound pain. He was losing himself, pixel by pixel, every time he looked at her. The final, definitive piece of the puzzle clicked into place about 4 months before the wedding. They had come for their weekly Sunday dinner, and while Leo was helping me clear the table, Isabel took a call in the hallway. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her voice, though low, was sharp with excitement. "No, I'm telling you, it's perfect," she'd whispered into her phone. "We just have to convince her it's for her own good. She's so trusting, she'll probably thank us for helping her downsize. Once we're in, we can take our time finding our own place. This location is worth a fortune." I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, but I said nothing. I returned to the kitchen, my movements calm, my expression serene. The game had been revealed, and I now understood the rules. She thought she was playing chess with a pawn, unaware that I had been observing the entire board from the beginning. From that day on, I began my own quiet investigation. I called an old family friend, a discreet financial planner named Amelia, and asked her to look into Leo and Isabel's finances. What she uncovered was not a story of a young couple saving for their future, but a cautionary tale of reckless ambition. They were drowning in debt. The lavish wedding, approaching $60,000, was financed entirely on high-interest credit cards. The lease on their trendy downtown loft was 2 months in arrears. The luxury SUV Isabel drove was a lease with payments they consistently made late. Their lifestyle was a glittering facade built on a foundation of sand. My apartment, I realized with a sickening lurch, was not just a convenient stepping stone for them. It was their life raft. The knowledge was a heavy weight in my heart. My son, the boy I'd raised to value integrity and hard work, had allowed himself to be convinced that his mother's home was the solution to his self-inflicted problems. The thought was more painful than any insult Isabel could ever dream of. Now, sitting on that stone bench, the chill of the evening seeping into my bones, I understood. The slap wasn't the beginning of the war, it was the end of a long, undeclared siege. For years, I had held back, protecting my son, protecting the quiet life Thomas and I had built. But my protection had become enablement. My silence had been mistaken for weakness. I finally reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady now. The tears had stopped. The shivering had ceased. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in over a year, a name I had naively hoped I would never need again in this capacity. Arthur Davison, please. A moment later, a calm, familiar voice came on the line. Helen? Is everything all right? Arthur, it's Helen Reed, I said, my voice low but clear. I need you. At the Birchwood Manor. As soon as you can get here. There was a pause. Arthur had been Thomas's most trusted advisor and had managed our affairs with quiet competence for 30 years. He understood the philosophy behind our simple life better than anyone. Bring the comprehensive portfolio, I continued. And the documentation regarding the private family trust. It's time. Helen, are you certain? Arthur's voice was laced with professional concern. Once you open that door, it cannot be closed. I glanced back at the manor. Through the tall, arched windows, I could see the party resuming. Isabel was laughing, holding court in the center of the dance floor, likely recounting her heroic act of putting the difficult old mother-in-law in her place. Leo was beside her, a weak, fleeting smile on his face, a ghost at his own wedding. I'm completely certain, Arthur, I said, a wave of profound, sorrowful peace washing over me. The door was kicked open tonight. I'm just going to walk through it. I ended the call and stood up. For the first time in years, I was not just Helen Reed, the quiet librarian. I was Helen Reed, the keeper of Thomas's legacy. And I was about to teach my son and his new wife a lesson not in finance, but in consequences. A lesson about the true cost of disrespect. They had made the terrible mistake of judging a book by its very plain cover, and they were about to discover that the story inside was far more complex than they could ever have imagined. The 30 minutes I waited for Arthur felt like a lifetime and a single breath all at once. I remained in the garden, a silent observer of the celebration I was about to dismantle. The strains of a waltz drifted through the open doors, a beautiful, poignant soundtrack to the end of an era. My mind replayed the family meeting from 2 weeks prior, the event that had served as the dress rehearsal for tonight's public humiliation. Isabel had orchestrated it perfectly. She and Leo had arrived at my apartment not alone, but with her parents in tow. It was a planned intervention, an ambush disguised as a loving conference. Her mother, a woman with a brittle smile and eyes that appraised everything, began the proceedings. Helen, dear, we need to talk about your future, she'd said, her tone syrupy sweet. Her father, a portly man who looked at my antique furniture as if calculating its resale value, chimed in. At your age, a large property becomes a liability. The upkeep, the stairs, the risk. It's simply not prudent to live this way. They spoke of me as if I weren't in the room, a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed. They had brochures. Glossy pamphlets for Golden Vistas Senior Living and Evergreen Meadows Assisted Care. They spread them on my coffee table, a colorful array of options for my obsolescence. Leo had been mostly silent, his posture hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. When he finally spoke, his words felt like they had been placed in his mouth by someone else. Mom, they're right. Izzy and I have been thinking. It would be a huge weight off our minds to know you were somewhere. Safer. More manageable. Manageable for whom, Leo? I had asked, my voice quiet but firm. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Isabel's father cleared his throat and moved to the financial portion of their presentation. We've run some preliminary numbers, he'd said, pulling out a spreadsheet. Selling this apartment would net a significant sum. Enough to cover top-tier care for you for the rest of your life, with a comfortable amount left over to help the kids get a solid start. There it was. The quiet part, said aloud. My home, my life, reduced to a line item on a balance sheet for their convenience. And if I refuse? I'd asked. Leo's eyes finally met mine, and what I saw in them broke a piece of my heart. It was not malice, but a weary, defeated resignation. Mom, we hope you won't make this difficult, he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. Isabel has been talking to some people. There are legal options if a person is no longer able to make sound decisions for themselves. The threat, veiled as it was unmistakable. They were prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't comply. My own son was willing to use the law to strip me of my autonomy, my home, and my dignity. That night, after they left, I didn't cry. I sat in the dark for hours, the brochures for Golden Vistas mocking me from the coffee table. The son I had raised, the boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a snail, had vanished. In his place was a man I no longer recognized. It was then I'd made the call to Amelia, asking her to dig deeper. The discovery of their debt was one thing, but Amelia uncovered something far more sinister. Through a friend who worked in legal services, she found inquiries made by Isabel Dawson regarding filial responsibility laws and the process for gaining power of attorney over an aging parent. She had been planning this for months, laying the groundwork for a legal battle she was confident she could win against a frail, confused old woman. A pair of headlights swept across the garden, pulling me from my reverie. Arthur Davison's sedan pulled into the parking lot. He got out, a distinguished man in a tailored suit, his silver hair catching the lamplight. He carried a leather briefcase that held the truth of my life. He met me by the stone bench, his expression grave. Helen, I have everything you asked for. But I must ask you one last time, are you sure this is the path you want to take? They chose the path, Arthur, I said, my voice steady. They chose it when they planned to take my home. They chose it when they threatened to take my freedom. And they cemented it when she struck me in front of my son, and he did nothing. I'm not choosing a path. I'm simply choosing to stand my ground. He nodded, a flicker of sad understanding in his eyes. Very well. Shall we? We walked toward the manor doors together. With each step, I felt not anger, but a profound sense of purpose. This was not about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was about justice, which is cold, clear, and precise. It was about re-establishing a boundary that had been systematically dismantled. It was about teaching a lesson that, I prayed, might one day save my son from the woman he had become. The music faltered and then stopped the moment we stepped back into the ballroom. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Arthur Davison was a well-known figure in Oak Haven's professional circles. His unexpected appearance at a wedding, briefcase in hand, signaled that this was no longer a simple family drama. Isabel's face paled as she saw us. What are you doing back here? She demanded, her voice losing its earlier confidence. Security. Leo stepped forward, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. Mom, what is this? Who is this man? Leo, I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority that seemed to surprise even me. This is Arthur Davison. For 30 years, he was your father's financial advisor. For the last 10, he has been mine. Arthur opened his briefcase with a crisp snap. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, he began, his voice professional and devoid of emotion, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. I am here at the request of my client, Mrs. Helen Reed, to deliver some notifications of an urgent financial nature. He produced a document. First, regarding the lease on your apartment at the Emery Lofts. The confidential rental guarantee that Mrs. Reed has been providing for the past 24 months, covering 60% of your monthly rent, is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Your landlord will be notified in the morning. Leo stared, his mouth agape. Rental guarantee? What are you talking about? My company gives me a housing stipend. A convenient fiction, it seems, Arthur said dryly. He produced another set of papers. Furthermore, the monthly payments of approximately $3,500 that have been automatically transferred from a trust managed by Mrs. Reed to cover your credit card balances, car lease, and personal loans, have been suspended. The final transfer was made last week. A collective gasp went through the room. Isabel looked as if she had been struck by lightning. That's a lie, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She can't. Look at her. She works in a library. Her car is ancient. She's a poor old woman living on a widow's pension. Appearances, as they say, can be deceiving, I said softly. Arthur, unperturbed, continued. Finally, regarding this beautiful celebration. The full cost of tonight's event, the venue, the catering, the orchestra, the flowers was prepaid from the same trust account, personally guaranteed by Mrs. Reed. As of 30 minutes ago, that payment guarantee has been formally withdrawn. The management of Birchwood Manor has been instructed to seek payment from the signatories of the event contract, Mr. and Mrs. Leo Hughes. The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of Arthur's words settled over the room like a physical presence. The $60,000 wedding, the loft, the car, the entire glittering life they had built, it was all a mirage, subsidized by the very woman they had just publicly humiliated. Leo finally turned to me, his eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic understanding. You, he whispered, the word a puff of air. It was you. All this time. I was helping my son, Leo, I said, my voice filled with a sorrow that was bone deep. I thought I was giving you a safety net while you found your footing. I never imagined you and your wife would see that net and decide to use it as a trampoline to bounce higher, all while plotting to cut the ropes that held it up. Isabel began to hyperventilate, her hands clutching at the bodice of her dress. This can't be happening. This is a nightmare. She turned on Leo, her beautiful face contorted with rage. You told me she had nothing. You told me all she had was the apartment. I thought she did, he cried, his voice breaking. We never lived like. Your father and I chose to live simply, Leo, I interrupted, my gaze locked on his. We believed that a person's character was their true wealth. It seems we failed to impress that lesson upon you. Just then, the manor's manager, a stern-faced man named Mr. Albright, bustled over, a contract in his hand. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, he said, his voice tight. I've just been on the phone with my accounting department. There appears to be a significant issue with the payment for this event. The perfect wedding had just turned into a pumpkin. As the guests began to murmur and discreetly check their phones, no doubt preparing to relay the most shocking society scandal Oakhaven had seen in decades, I looked at my son. For the first time, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the terrified boy who had lost his way. The path back for him would be long and arduous, and he would have to walk it alone. Arthur closed his briefcase. Our business here is concluded, Helen. I nodded. As we turned to leave, I spoke one last time, my voice just loud enough for Leo and Isabel to hear over the growing chaos. You wanted my apartment to start your new life. Well, now you have it. You are starting over, from the very beginning. I hope, for your sake, you build this one on a stronger foundation. Leaving the ballroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a vast, aching emptiness, the kind that comes after a necessary amputation. I had saved myself, but I had lost my son. As the doors closed behind me, cutting off the sounds of their collapsing world, I walked out into the quiet night, the splintered pieces of my glasses still clutched in my hand, a tangible reminder of everything that had been broken. And everything that, from this moment on, would have to be rebuilt. In the months that followed, the fallout was exactly as Arthur had predicted, swift and total. Leo and Isabel were evicted from their loft. The leased SUV was repossessed. Birchwood Manor sued them for the full cost of the wedding, a debt that would follow them for years. They were forced to declare bankruptcy, a public record of their folly. Isabel's parents, once so eager to manage my affairs, washed their hands of the entire mess, offering no financial support. The couple moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the far side of town, the opposite of the historic district they had so coveted. My life, in contrast, found a new, quieter rhythm. The initial storm of town gossip eventually subsided, replaced by a sort of respectful awe. People at the library would look at me with a new understanding in their eyes. Amelia and a few other old friends rallied around me, their quiet support a healing balm. I made a significant, anonymous donation to the Oakhaven Public Library, allowing them to digitize their entire historical archive, a project that had been a dream of the head librarian for years. I set up educational trusts for the children of my closest friends. I found quiet, meaningful ways to use the resources Thomas had left me, turning his legacy of silent wealth into bridges of community support, just as he would have wanted. Leo called me once, about 3 months after the wedding. His voice was strained, angry. He accused me of destroying his life, of humiliating him, of being cruel and unforgiving. He spoke of my betrayal. I listened patiently, without interruption. When he was finished, I said only one thing. Leo, I did not destroy your life. I simply stopped financing the illusion you were living. The life that fell apart was never real to begin with. When you are ready to talk about that, and to talk about what happened on your wedding night with an honest heart, you know my number. He hung up. He did not call back. A year passed. Then another. The silence from Leo was a constant, low-grade ache in my heart. I learned through Amelia, who occasionally heard things through the town grapevine, that he was working a low-level sales job and Isabel was a receptionist at a dental clinic. They were surviving, but not thriving. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after the wedding, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Leo standing on my porch. He looked older. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to settle deep in his bones. He was thinner and his suit, though clean, was frayed at the cuffs. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the welcome mat. Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I stepped aside and let him pass. He walked into the living room, the one he had grown up in, and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. He ran a hand over the back of his father's old armchair. "Isabel left me," he said, still not looking at me. "6 months ago. She said she couldn't live like this anymore. She said I had failed her." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were filled with a profound, desolate sorrow. She was right. I did fail her. But the person I failed most was you. Tears began to stream down his face, silent and uninhibited. "I have gone over that night 1,000 times in my head, Mom. 1,000,000 times. The way she hit you. The look on your face. And I just stood there. I did nothing. I let it happen." He choked on a sob. "I was so afraid of losing her, I didn't realize I was losing myself. I was so desperate for the life she promised, I was willing to sacrifice my own mother to get it." He sank into the armchair, his face in his hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I had to tell you. I had to say I'm sorry. For everything. For being weak. For being a coward. For breaking your heart." I sat down on the ottoman in front of him, my own tears blurring my vision. I reached out and placed my hand on his knee. The anger I had held onto for so long had vanished, washed away by the tide of his genuine remorse. In its place was only the deep, instinctual love of a mother for her child. "Oh, Leo," I whispered. "The path back is a long one." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Is there a path back?" I thought for a long moment, looking at the son I had lost and who was now, perhaps, finding his way home. The wound was deep, the trust shattered. A simple "I forgive you" would be a disservice to the pain we had both endured. Healing would require more than words, it would require time, effort, and a rebuilding of character, brick by painful brick. "There is always a path back to love, Leo," I said softly. "But the path back to trust. That is something you will have to build yourself." It was not a complete reconciliation. It was not a Hollywood ending where all is forgotten in a single, tearful embrace. It was something more real, and perhaps more valuable. It was a beginning. An open door to a future that was not guaranteed, but was, for the first time in a very long time, possible. As he sat there, weeping in his father's chair, I felt a flicker of hope. The quiet book of my life was not over. A new, uncertain chapter was just beginning to be written. And for now, that was enough.